Persepolis 2. Persepolis 2 is a story by Mary Jane Strappy that discusses her life and her time in high school as the Iranian migration was occurring. The story highlights her struggles and how she conquers the challenges faced. She also reflects on the different historical events that are present. Mary Jane Strappy was born in 1969, but moved in order to escape the political issues that were arising in her home country. Most of what occurred in her life is displayed in her forms of work, including novels, cartoons, and the directing of films. Her family was very active in Iran, but with the Iranian revolutions that had changed. Her family had been oppressed, and Strappy had to move in order to be safe. Strappy had ended up moving to Vienna, Austria with her uncle, which changed her life. We can see the big changes that she endures when making the switch from Iran to Vienna. In Persepolis and Persepolis 2, she writes about the impact that had move caused her. From that point on, she had continued to become a successful, well-respected author by all cultures. One of her biggest successes was Persepolis, which went on to become a film as well. She had influenced many through her literature and had made a name for herself. Her work had helped to show readers what her life as an Iranian woman was like firsthand, while also showing the impacts. The Iranian Revolution was a semi-recent event that occurred in 1978 through 1979. The event had a large effect on almost all Iranians. Although the event was recent, the problems that occurred stemmed decades back due to leadership and politics. In the early 1900s, Britain and Russia fought over the ruling of Iran, thus creating a lasting divide. In 1970, it became very violent and there were many issues. Many attacks and riots began to break out because of the Shah's family rule over the country. Essentially, many different political figures and their supporters fought violently over the sake of the loyalty to the ruler in politics. Another major issue that surfaced during the Iranian Revolution was rejection of the westernization and modernization of the country. Many wanted to stick with the classic and traditional ways of life and how they have been carried out throughout time. While many wanted to stick to the traditional ways, others thought that it would be better to advance the country and accept it. By the end of the revolution, Iran became a republic with clergy that was rule over the entire country. Iranian displacement. Just as Strappy did, many people fled in order to escape the persecution and trauma that was occurring in their homeland. People went to many places throughout the world in order to gain a sense of safety, and while they had moved to be safe, it had impacted them. In Iran, the population collectively celebrated and exhibited their culture in a united way, but throughout other parts of the world it was different, and not all cultures were celebrated equally. The sense of familiarity that was once there was immediately ripped away, as the Iranian population had begun to sparse throughout the world. There were dispersed Iranian communities, but nothing would compare to the actual country. Strappy highlights this throughout her novel by including the challenges she faced, and goes over key details and emotions that she had felt. Cultural identity. The specific theme might be one of the most relevant and meaningful themes that are learned throughout the story. She is an Iranian woman in a white-dominated country, and because of this she suffers from prejudice and oppression because of her cultural appearance and nationality. As a girl at high school, it can be quite impressionable and made her feel guilt and embarrassment. She had begun to feel ashamed of her nationality as she was considered different than the other kids that she went to school with. It could be seen that she had begun to become more comfortable and in her skin within Persepolis 2 than in the first novel. This is a notable element of the story because it is a relatable feeling to many readers. The significant message of the theme is Strappy returning to her country and pursuing her identity that brings her happiness. Concept of gender. Among the many themes that are seen in the story, the concept of gender impression are one of the major points discussed. The author, being a young woman that first-handedly has to deal with the hatred towards women that is quite common in her culture. In most traditional cultures, women have the sole purpose of cooking, cleaning, and taking care of children and households. This was similar in Iranian culture, but to an extent that exhibited a great deal of violence. When living in Iran, she knew that many women were attacked on the basis of sex, and certain restrictions had been placed upon them, such as things and clothing that they would like to wear, or the jobs that they could have. When she moved to Austria to live with her uncle, she had hoped that she would be able to gain some respect for her gender. Although this was somewhat true, there is still a presence of gender inequality present throughout Austria and every other country. She now had to face prejudice in the form of catcalling and shaming, which was different from her experience as a girl growing up in Iran. In both Iran and Austria, she experienced inequality in genders, but in different ways.